Hey, good morning, y'all. Hope you're doing well today. So in today's message, we're going to be breaking down the Disney movie Beauty and the Beast through the lens of the hero's journey, as well as considering archetypal psychology, right? Which is basically, at least through my understanding and in this particular example today, what we're going to do, it's essentially looking at the characters of the story as personifications of the different aspects of one person's psyche, right? The hero's psyche. And it's kind of like I mentioned before, when you think about the hero's journey, which we've talked about, in Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's really interesting. But I find it interesting that he calls it not just a person's journey, but the hero's journey. And the reason I think there's a distinction there is because it's not for everyone. And here's what I mean by that. It's going to be exemplified, first of all, in the main character of Beauty and the Beast, in Belle. Okay, she's the perfect example of this right here. She essentially isn't like most of the people in her town, right? And even in the beginning of the movie, they're singing about how she's not like us, they say. Isn't she odd? Things like that in the song. And so and then when you look at Belle, she's just like this eternal optimist, you know what I mean, like in her own world, sort of. And just she keeps singing that there must be more than this provincial life. And so it's like she's very hopeful, and she knows that there's more, right, to find out, to discover, to live, to embrace. And so this is an important distinction, and it goes right along with that Bible verse, that you have to ask before you ask and believe before you can receive, right? And also you have to have desire first. Desire is an important element to even motivate somebody to knock at the door. Again, like the Bible verse that says, knock and the door shall be open, seek and you shall find. Somebody's not going to seek and they're not going to knock on the door if they don't have the desire to do so. So what we're going to see in the opening scene is how, the townspeople essentially have just normalized this very undeveloped, immature state of their psyches, right? It's like they just didn't develop and mature and do the work to grow their own psyches, right? They just didn't have that desire. So that's the difference here between the hero in the hero's journey versus someone who is very complacent and doesn't have a desire to learn and grow. Okay, and it's interesting to see in the beginning this scene that I was describing to you, where it's kind of a mixture, the song, where you have Belle singing at some points and then it switches over to the townspeople, how it's eliminating this contrast, right, in people. And so there's elements of the movie that are representative of more than just one person, right? More than one person's psyche. So that's a great example of the difference in people, right? Which I'm sure you can identify in your own life if you are someone who is a truth seeker and you like to go as deep as possible and learn as much as you can, and you just really truly enjoy learning and growing. You're gonna, quickly find out, those in your life that you're going to be able to see the contrast in yourself and in them, right? So I thought that was really interesting. And as we go through in this presentation, again, this is my first movie breakdown. It's my understanding that I'm totally covered by the fair use law, and this is something that a lot of YouTubers do when they break down a movie to for educational purposes, for critique and things like that. So that's what we're doing. And I just want to say that please don't think that I'm trying to assert that my perspective on the movie is equivalent to me asserting that that's Disney's intention with the story, you know, with the storyline. I'm certainly not trying to say that, so I just want to put that out there. But excuse me, you know, I've just been I've enjoyed others who have broken down movies, and so I just want to give a shout out to J Dreamers, because he does this on the regular, and it's really interesting. He breaks down movies through the lens of signs of earth cycles and apocalyptic type cycles, right? And so I just want to say too that, you know, when you have a desire like Belle to want to seek out truth and learn as much as you can about our reality, I think it's totally normal when you head down this path. And maybe you've always kind of been this way, you know, like even as a kid, I know I have been. But it's kind of like you may start out in one particular area, wanting to discover and learn as much as you can about one particular area, say like religion, for example. And then as you do that, it's going to, there's going to be points, right, bits and pieces that are going to just take you in a different direction. And so what happens is, as you're searching for the truth, you quickly learn, and I'm just speaking from my experience, but you quickly learn that it's not like all these different areas of study are really separate and different. They're kind of interwoven. And so like philosophy and religion and spirituality, and as well as science, you know, and astronomy and history, all of it kind of comes together. And so in that light, I just want to say that you know, I feel like if you have an interest in breaking movies down for yourself and just trying to dig in deep and see what the symbolism is and how it's speaking for you, just consider that if you see it one way, such as symbolic of our material physical world, it doesn't mean that you can't also see it as symbolic of the soul's journey, like what we're going to talk about today, right? The hero's journey. It can be both. It can be both, because there's a lot of clues that are just all around us, you know, bits and pieces left from ancient cultures that all we have are the bits and pieces left, and we have to put everything together like a puzzle. And so I don't, like I say a lot on my channel, I don't like to approach anything with an either or black and white mindset. I think that it just, when you're trying to get a grasp on ultimate truth, I think ultimate truth is more like a both and, you know, it's kind of like that's right and this is right as well. So I just wanted to say that out there, put that out there. So but I don't have anything fancy. I don't have a green screen or anything like that. I'm just going to be imposing these images on top of my video to share with you, and I just hope that you enjoy the presentation today. And I'm still going to try to not keep it too long, but honestly, when I watched the movie last night and I was making notes, I've got several pages of notes, so we'll see. It may be a little bit longer than normal. But thank you for coming along to hear the message today. I hope you really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so I had mentioned earlier about, you know, the scene in the town, but let's back up a little bit. Okay, that was I felt like that was important to share with you all, just to open the presentation. But when the movie opens, it's got this very fairy tale, you know, kind of look to it. And so there's this stained glass that's shown, you know, it kind of pans through the forest and shows you where the castle is in the forest, and there's a young prince that lives there. And so they show this stained glass window that I guess is on the castle, and there's something inscribed on the stained glass in Latin, and it's I'm probably not going to pronounce it right, Vincent Casey Vincent, which means he conquers who conquers himself. And so how relevant is that? I mean, that right there tells you that it's certainly related to or relevant through the lens of discussing, you know, ego and just a person's growth and maturity. Yes, so he conquers who conquers himself. And I thought that was really interesting. So as it's showing this this stained glass window, you know, there's a narrator speaking, and he's explaining that the prince, you know, had everything that he could ever possibly want, and that he was spoiled and selfish and unkind. Okay, so that's an important element. And then what happens is this old lady, but she's real kind of, you know, witchy looking, wicked looking, like an old hag, like what Estes would talk about in her book. She knocks at the door, and she offers the prince a rose in exchange for shelter from the cold, right? So it's just a totally understandable transaction. She's like, hey, I'm out here freezing in the cold, you know, here's a rose, would you please give me, you know, some shelter? But he rejected her, and she warned him not to be fooled by appearances, and she said to him, you know, beauty is within. But he rejected her a second time. So when he rejected her the second time, then she suddenly, you know, turns into this beautiful enchantress, right? And so it was a test. That's what that was. It was a test for this spoiled and selfish and unkind prince, and he failed miserably, right? So it said in the movie, it said she had seen that there was no love in his heart. Okay, so she winds up putting a curse on him and all the staff that live in the castle, and he turns into this beast. And it, you know, he's described as a hideous beast. And so the only connection from that point forward he had with the external world was this magic mirror. And then he was left with that rose from the woman as well, right? I mean, he immediately regretted when she turned into this beautiful enchantress. It shows him falling at her feet, and he totally regretted it, but it was too late. You know what I mean? So he had, like I said, failed the test. But he was left with this magic mirror, and also this one rose. And so the deal was, with the curse, if he could learn to love, if he could learn to love someone and have that person return his love him back in return, that was, you know, an important part, by his 21st birthday. And also it was like when the last petal fell from the rose, right? Then the spell would be broken. And if not, then he would be doomed to living under the curse the rest of his life, right? So of course it talks about how he fell into despair and had just lost all hope, right? That's the opening of the movie. So Belle, Belle, this is where it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, Belle's just very innocent. She's basically the total personification of somebody who's truly innocent, okay? And what you see if you look really close throughout the town is that the townspeople, it's not that they're necessarily bad people, but they notice that she's different, you know, and again, she's in her own world, just happy-go-lucky. And the people in the town are, it's just showing little things that are kind of like questionable kind of behavior, but stuff that society normalizes, okay? So like, let me give you an example. Like a lot of the women are scantily clad, I think you would say, right? It's, you know, and I can't remember. There's just all these little bitty, you'll have to watch it. There's all these little bitty scenes throughout, you know, as the camera is going through the town, right? Showing the townspeople. And essentially it just kind of told me, it's kind of like, you know, how people, symbolic to me of how people normalize ego. And by doing so, they're essentially compromising their morality, their moral compass. That's what's happening. And so, but you know, Belle, again, she's just blissfully happy in her ignorance. Again, the old saying, ignorance is bliss, right? But she knows there's more. She knows there's more in life. And she's dressed very conservatively and just very kind. Everybody knows she's kind, but she's different, you know? So, yes. I looked up Provincial because she was singing, there must be more than this provincial life, which means, provincial means unsophisticated, right? Or narrow-minded. In other words, this is just exemplary of us, people who have the desire to truly do our best in life and learn and grow, okay? When you start out in that first innocent, naive state, that's what this is all about, okay? It's just really interesting to see how stories and movies, even especially the imagery, and when, you know, when a good storyteller like Clarissa Pinkola, SD's I point because I usually keep my book in the Jeep with me, but it's like when a great storyteller is telling the story like this, it's so colorful that you can imagine these images are like forming in your mind as the story's going. So there's something important, I think, with visualization to really grasp the depth and width and complexity of a lesson. So again, I just encourage you to watch the movie. But yes, Provincial, she's like, there must be more than this provincial life. And so she knows, she's acknowledging that she's naive, essentially, right? Yes. So the whole movie is just full of symbolism. It truly, truly is. And then we have Gaston. And there's one word to describe Gaston, and that's huge ego. That's 2 words, but I wrote ego, but huge ego. It's really more accurate. And what's interesting is, again, this is all very symbolic, okay? He's portrayed as like this, you know, what society would define, I guess, that society. As evidenced by the reaction of all the people when he would come through. He's seen as this super good looking, you know, charming guy. It's just, you know, he just got everything going on for him or whatever, right? But he's disgusting to Belle. So it's funny because it's like, I can really relate to Belle. I can look back on myself, like, you know, when I was younger, and it's kind of how I was. It's like, I couldn't understand how, you know, some of my friends, you know, would find some of the, you know, the guys attractive, like in school and stuff. I was just like, man, they're so full of themselves. It's just always been a kind of a turn off for me. But so I relate to Belle. Belle's just got her noses. We only have one nose, right? There's a laugh for you. I'm not going to cut that out. But Belle's always got her nose in books. And so she's just focused on learning. But yeah, he's just really chasing after Belle hard, okay? And so he even like catches up to her in the town and grabs a book out of her hands and throws it in the mud, and he's basically condemning her imagination. He says something really condemning about her imagination, and she's like, oh, come on, Gaston, you know, you're positively primeval, is what she says. So of course I looked that up. That means primitive, raw, elementary, right? So again, this is like he's the perfect embodiment of just a totally unrefined ego. Just, in other words, ego, how it presents in a person when they have no self-control or restraint whatsoever, and they're just totally indulgent in all their desires. And then unfortunately sometimes people like this can be rewarded by society, you know, affirming them and thinking that's great. I mean, there were women in the town in the movie, they're just fainting over Gaston as he walked by, and Belle was just really put off, right? So then you have her dad, Belle's dad. And just like a lot of the stories in the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, a lot of times the father figure of the main character in these stories is representative of the gatekeeper role of our psyche, which is controls our judgment, okay? So when you're naive, your judgment essentially isn't that great. You're overly trusting. You don't know how to discern who you should trust and things like that. So, so when we look at in the beginning of the story how Belle's dad is, he's very lovable and hardworking, but he's kind of just a really oblivious guy, and it's totally exemplified in how she when we first meet her dad in the story. You know, she walks into his shop, and he's like this inventor, and he's been working on something, and there's this machine that's like chopping wood or something, and it just starts shooting these chopped pieces of wood out. One of them bonks him in the head. He's like, you know, dazed. He's just, again, he's very lovable, very hardworking, but just very oblivious. Totally perfect example of that gatekeeper role of our psyche when, you know, just like Belle, you know, we just think everything's, you know, great and grand in the world, and we can kind of detect, you know, really obvious egos like in Gaston, but other than that, we're just really kind of innocent. And so yes, so he basically is and besides the gatekeeper role in our judgment center, it can also be symbolic of our conscious awareness, okay, the dad role. So he's got somewhere to go. He gets on horseback, and he takes off on this trail, okay, and his route takes him over this stream. Again, there's always a water element in these stories, and so he's going over this bridge, over this stream, and as soon as he crosses over the bridge, he's in this dark forest, and so that kind of begins the descent into the underworld, that stage, that part of the hero's journey, okay? So he's making his way towards the mountains where the castle is, right? Got to climb that mountain. So, but yeah, he enters this dark forest. It's just, and all these elements are just so parallel, you know, through the different stories. It's cute because he comes to this shortcut in the forest. It's like he comes to a fork rather in the forest, and his horse wants to go down the path that's well lit, and he wants to go down the path that's dark, and he keeps trying to tell his horse, hey, it's a shortcut, but the horse is, you know, kind of bucking up, not wanting to go that way. So eventually he gets him to go that way, down the dark part, and he starts to get very scared. It's very confusing. He's not real sure where he's going. Of course, that's the whole wandering part when you're down in the underworld. Like, you've kind of your naivety has been stripped. There's been something you've gone through, some hard times, challenging times. You've been made aware of something. Maybe someone close to you was not who you thought they were. So in other words, all these different things in our life can shock us awake, and that's represented here. Whatever it is in our lives that causes our innocence to go away, right? There's a period of time after that happens that we don't really have our footing, and we don't really know where we're going, and we feel lost, you know, and so that's perfectly embodied in this scene. So he's got this lantern with him, and the light, of course, goes out. It's blown out, and he starts to be chased by wild animals. His horse abandons him and all this stuff, right? So he finds himself at the castle. And so I wrote that essentially this is like facing the shadow self of the ego, right? The unhealthy part of the ego. We can definitely consider it to be symbolic of that as well. But so Beast essentially is angry that he's there. He's just mad at the world, you know, because he's under that curse, and so he locks him up, okay? This could be representative of the dark night of the soul, where you're just really kind of working things out. So Beast is really angry. He locks him up, and he just says, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here. And so this is really interesting, because now you have the dad, which is the, you know, representative of naivety, and you have Beast, which is symbolic of ego, but not in the same sense as Gaston. And we're going to talk about that difference in just a little bit, okay? But essentially, you know, Beast has failed an important test, and he's under a curse. In other words, he's suffering consequence. Beast is suffering consequence from living via ego, from being unkind and selfish. And so he's like, basically this whole, with him saying you're not welcome here to the dad, it's like saying innocence is not even a thing anymore. Like, you know, sometimes we can be selfish and unkind and act from ego and it be an unconscious act. You see what I'm saying? So this is an important distinction between Beast and Gaston. Gaston will never change. Gaston is the kind of person who, him acting via his ego and just continually and overinflating it and being rewarded by the community and things like that, he'll never change. He has no desire to change, right? But Beast was forced to change. See, and we're going to talk more in depth about that in a little bit. But essentially, innocence is no longer a thing, right? It's just you're no longer welcome here. So meanwhile, in the story, Gaston it kind of goes back to this, you know, Belle in the town. Gaston is trying so hard to woo Belle, and he's just so presumptuous. Like, he's on his way to her home and he's already like planned the wedding. As soon as she steps out of the house, he's like gonna marry her, and his friends are like, you haven't even proposed? He's like, yeah, but she'll marry me. I mean, he's just so presumptuous, you know. But yeah, but when he tries to go in Belle's house and everything, and he's just coming on to her real strong, she rejects him, kicks him out. Okay, remember, Belle is the kind of person to live from the heart. Remember, she doesn't fit in with the townspeople, and she's singing about wanting more and adventure, so she wants to learn and grow. She doesn't want to tango with living life via ego, even though that's rewarded. It's shown that it's rewarded in the town. A lot of times that's true in our world. You know, think about advertising and, you know, famous musicians and different things that are put in the highlight in our culture. It's like, it's just ego over the top. And so she doesn't want anything to do with that. So that right there is when a person's going to be stuck and never advance and grow, right? They don't want to. It's serving them well and they're happy with it, right? So again, she wants to learn and grow. Again, you have to have that desire to ask, to start the process, to ask, believe, receive. But a lot of people just normalize ego, and they're good with that, right? Yes. So, all right. I'm trying to see my notes here. All right. So essentially, Belle sets out to look for her dad. Okay. And so she sets out to look for her dad, because she's like, all right, he should be back by now, or whatever it is. So she finds her way to the castle. Okay. And she sees, or I'm sorry, there's a little candle character, right, which his name is Lumiere. He sees Belle in the castle, and he gets real excited and tells all the other the staff, you know, hey, she's come to break the spell. You know, she's the one. She's come to break the spell. So I think it's interesting that it was his character. It was a flame, right? And it totally goes with his personality of his character. He's just like, again, just very optimistic. This eternal optimist, very excited. And this is very foretelling of the future. Okay, notice that it's a flame. It's like this internal light, right? Again, representative of that, symbolic of our inner guiding light, you know, kind of our intuition. It's like he knew the moment he saw her that she was there to break the spell. Okay, so so she finds her dad. She meets Beast, and he's very angry and stuff that she's there, and she offers to trade places with her dad. She doesn't want him to be locked up, right? And Beast is in the shadows, you know, at this meeting in the castle, and she says to him, come into the light. Come into the light. So this is very important. We have all of these characters in the castle now. We have Belle, and we have her innocence, her dad, her failed gatekeeper, essentially, and we have Beast, which is the shadow self, right? The part of ourselves that is at fault, that is limited, or sinful, you may say. And so when she says, come into the light, that's the moment where, you know, we're ready to see our faults. Gaston will never see his faults because they are praised, okay? He praises them and the town praises them. So that's the difference. But Beast, he knows he did wrong. He knows he did wrong. He's living under this curse. A lot of times we persecute ourselves when we are aware of our own faults. So this is a great point to go ahead and break down the difference between Gaston and the Beast with regards to ego, okay? So Beast would represent, because we all have ego. We all have an unconscious part where we act from that, and you know, we can be unkind at times. We can be selfish at times, right? But Beast is representative of, in the process he's going through under the curse. It's kind of like when you're self-aware because you want to be, because you want to examine yourself and admit your faults and do better and learn and grow. Sometimes we can fall into this state of depression where we're just persecuting ourselves and our minds. So ego can trap you in that way too, okay? Because you're facing it, and that's not good, that's not healthy, but it's part of the process. You're never going to rise above your faults if you never even see your faults. You have to acknowledge your faults first, right? You have to experience those hard feelings that comes with that first. And that's why over here on this other end of the spectrum of ego, Gaston is just holding on forever, right? Just standing strong and being prideful in himself as just the full embodiment of ego, right? Just flamboyant. So this is two different ways that ego can play out in a person. See, and I love how the movie shows how society applauds people that embrace ego, because that seems to be the case. Okay, so yeah, Belle says come into the light. So this is where she's facing her shadow self, what Carl Jung would call the shadow self. So he agrees to the trade and lets her dad go, right? Frees her dad and imprisons Belle because she wants to make that trade. Again, this is trading your innocence for getting comfortable with your shadow self, okay? This is doing the work. That's what they call doing the work. So of course she's, you know, crying and mourning shortly after that in her room because she didn't get to say goodbye to her dad. It was just kind of a hurried process in the movie. She's stuck there. Beast is very harsh. He's very demanding. He's very angry. You know, he's mad at himself and consequently mad at the world, you know, and it's really symbolic of the process of assimilating the ego, which means accepting your faults and not judging them. Just accepting that you are faulty and you do have limitations, right? It has to be acknowledged, and furthermore, which we'll see as the movie plays out, it has to be acknowledged and furthermore loved or embraced, okay? For there to be a transformation, but not loved like what Gaston does. You know, there has to be that desire for the transformation. So the dad is the gatekeeper, or the conscious awareness. He left very quickly, which is, like I said earlier, how it happens for a lot of us. Our innocence does leave quickly sometimes, right? And then sometimes it takes many years, mostly because we're fooling ourselves, because we're ignoring red flags and we don't want to lose our innocence, so or our naivety. So yeah, it's just very fitting metaphor for this whole experience. But then it goes back to Gaston showcasing his greatness, you know, amongst the town people. So, and then, let's see, Beast is, let's see, and the townspeople love Gaston. We already talked about that. Okay, so the dad, you know, has been freed from the castle. So he makes his way back to the town, and he goes into this I don't know if it was like just a restaurant, a pub, whatever it is, but Gaston's there, and he's like, you know, trying to tell people about this beast that he just experienced, right? This resonated with me so much. It's kind of like when you wake up from this what do you call it? It's like a collective, almost like a collective psychosis that we have in our society from normalizing ego, right? Which that new book I bought, that's what that talks about, okay? It's like a collective psychosis. It's really interesting. But it's very much associated with that Bible verse that says that we're supposed to not be as the world is, right? To be in the world, but not of it. It's kind of like that. So here's Belle's dad returning back. See, you can't do that. You can never go back and be seen the same again, because you're not the same. So he goes back and he's like, hey, y'all are never going to believe. Y'all are never going to believe. I was just in this castle with this beast, and they think he's lost his mind. You know, it's the same thing in Plato's allegory of the cave, when the person gets outside the cave and sees the whole truth. You know, they went all the way out, and then they try to come back in and explain it, and the people are like, okay, I don't even know what you're saying. I can't comprehend what you're saying. You're crazy, and all this other stuff. So you're just it's almost like there's been this split. There's been this split. It's almost like, really, if you want to look at it spiritually, as people awaken to truth, they're essentially freeing themselves from this web of lies that's been normalized in our world. And in doing so, you could say that the separating of the wheat and the tares, right, is happening as people awaken spiritually, symbolically speaking. You see what I'm saying? Like in the here and now. And as, you know, people start waking up, it almost feels like the snowball effect in society, doesn't it? So it just feels like we're seeing this now more and more ourselves everywhere you look. But yeah, he's trying to explain this, and they're like, you're crazy. They laugh at him and stuff, and mock him. And so Gaston, again, representative of the flamboyant ego, kicks the dad out in the cold, right? To me, that's like saying, you know, don't become conscious that the ego is bad. You might even view it that way, right? So the ego doesn't want to accept its faults, its limitations, right? It's sin. So it's kind of like Gaston can't tolerate conscious awareness now that it has actually become wise and awakened and no longer naive. The gatekeeper has actually matured. He's seen the truth in the castle, and he tries to come back and tell people. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. Okay, so for some people, I think when this happens, this is when you might call this the age of accountability. This is when a person becomes conscious that what they're doing or how they're living is wrong, but they choose to continue to do it anyway. That's what Gaston did. Okay, because again, he's rewarded. The Bible says, you know, people have their reward. They're not going to be rewarded, you know, spiritually in the kingdom of heaven, because they've already got their earthly, worldly, materialistic reward, which we would just call very superficial and shallow, right? But to them, it's everything. It's everything. All right. So, yes. You know, when you think about beast, you know, you have Gaston kicking the conscious awareness out, but you have beast who imprisoned the conscious awareness. Okay, he wanted to imprison it. So this is where it's like representative of the hero in the hero's journey's desire to want to get intimate with their faults in the underworld. Okay, but to imprison your conscious awareness to that degree. Again, remember, Beast is just in a really bad place. This will be akin to sinking into hopelessness. So again, you have these two opposite ends of the spectrum of like how you can deal with ego. Fully embrace it and be proud of it, or let it totally destroy you once you become aware of how faulty you are. It's like two opposite ends of this spectrum. Okay? All right. So the next scene is where Belle is talking with the furniture, the china, the armoire, and the china in her bedroom. Okay, remember, these are the castle staff who have been placed under the spell as well. So it turned them into these fixtures in the castle. So she's talking with them, and they're very, very sweet and very encouraging and inspiring. And I view all these characters as your spirit guides. That are always found in the hero's journey and exemplified in myth and fairy tale and folklore, like in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. All these stories follow, very similar patterns, right? And so at this point of the cycle, in the underworld where everything's being worked out, you're facing your shadow self, your faults. You're seeing them, and you're not running from it, and you're not gonna sink into a depression. You're working it out. You're dealing with it. That's when those helpers come, and this can be in the form of just direct spiritual help, or it can be via actual other people in the world that I feel like God places on our path to help us. So either way, it's still divinely orchestrated, I think, anyway, right? So she's just Belle's really sad talking with him. She says, she's lost her father, her dream, she's lost everything, which really means her innocence, and her wonder, and her hope even. So it's interesting to me that the castle staff, even though they're, still under this curse, they're very happy and hopeful and encouraging. Okay, I think that's a great example of faith. Remember, the first character that Belle meets in the castle is Lumiere, the light, and he just knows, that intuition, he knows that she has come to break the spell. And then you have all these other characters that are kind of supportive of that, you know what I mean? So I think that all of these characters are like the spirit guides along the path, as well as exemplary of faith, right? That you're going to make it through. All right, there's always helpers in these myths, right? In this story, it's not just that they're with the hero in the darkness, but when the spell is broken, they're free too, which is part of the story. And that right there is really interesting. I want you to think about it. They're happy, they're hopeful, these helpers. Belle is kind of like, I don't know, she's starting to lose hope. She's sad. She's mourning, her old self. She says, I've lost everything. Because you feel like your old self is forever gone. When the veil is lifted or torn, or, you've been living your whole life with this wool over your eyes and it's been lifted or whatever, and you can see, I once was blind, but now I see, like the old, gospel song, you can never go back. You can never be that same naive person ever again, right? So she's mourning that. But these helpers are very hopeful. And I find it interesting that they're focused on Belle, right? They're not selfish in any way. But as they're helping her, the end result is that they will be free of a curse as well. This is important, because there's this old saying, and I looked it up, and it's attributed to a lot of different people, but it's essentially, this is the meat and potatoes right here. You teach best what you need to learn most. So as these helpers are focused on Belle and her situation, in the end, they're going to benefit too. So it's kind of like you're walking this path together, even though it may have begun as one is, the student, one's the teacher. In the end, it's kind of a symbiotic I think you might say, you know, relationship, where you're just kind of walking each other. And so as a teacher, I can say firsthand that's true. You can think you know a topic or a subject, and then when you go to teach it, you wind up learning even more about it in the process of teaching. So it's really cool how that works. So I just wanted to bring that in with those characters in the movie. And I think that it's just, in other words, it's transformative. This process is transformative for both the helper and the one who needs to be helped. And that's just God at work. That's the way I see it. It's just the numinous aspect of how God works in mysterious ways, truly. So, so then it shows how these helpers are having to coax Beast to be gentle, because he's so brash. He's so brash. And they're just like, gentle, gentle, gentle. So he's, you know, wanting to develop a relationship with Belle, you know. And so he's very willing to do it, but he's very defensive. In other words, he's very wounded. He's very, very wounded. So the whole castle is dark, you know, throughout all this, okay? But there's these little sparks throughout, which are the helpers, okay? And then there's the luminous rose, okay, that was left by the hag in the beginning of the movie. So I want to share with you Isaiah chapter 35 verse 1 says, "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." So here we have this rose that stands for potential. Essentially, through the lens of the hero's journey, it stands for the boon, the treasure that awaits the hero once the hero completes the journey, okay? So it's symbolic of that, of hope for the future, okay? So they, you know, they're ready to invite Belle to the dinner table, and so they're singing "Be Our Guest," you know. Well, first of all, let me back up, you know. Beast invites her to dinner, and she doesn't come down. He's so brash and harsh with her. She just didn't want to be around that kind of energy, you know what I mean? So he's angry, he storms off, but she's hungry. So she tells, you know, the castle staff in her room, she's like, "I'm really kind of hungry." So they're like, "Come on, we'll take care of you." So she comes down to the dinner table by herself, you know, with just the helpers in the castle, and it's really kind of beautiful, and they just are so welcoming with her. And so she's still keeping Beast at a distance. See, they're in the castle together, but it's just kind of like it's being worked out. So she's sitting down at the table to eat, which that in itself, you could just take that as a tangent and run way, you know, way down this rabbit hole researching the symbolism of that, even with regards to religion and stuff. So but yeah, they start to sing this song, "Be Our Guest," just before the banquet, okay? And it's interesting because on the countertop, right beneath the cupboard, there's a lion head sculpture beside the cupboard with a candle, a lit candle. But the lion head, the lion is sleeping. It has his eyes closed, but the candle is on top of his head, and it's lit, right, when dinner starts. But then, or I'm sorry, it starts like that, but when dinner starts, then the candle is out. It shows that again, the candle's out. So I think there's definitely some symbolism there. I'm trying to work that out. If I can put it together, I'll drop it in the description for you in a day or two. So maybe you can figure it out and comment on it. But the etymology of the word guest was really interesting. So there's this this root form, and it's like got German roots and all this other stuff too, is Gast. G-A-S-T, which means stranger. Okay, stranger. And then of course we have Gaston. That name also means the foreigner or the guest. So interesting, okay? So she's dining with these helpers as the guest, okay? And you know, in the Bible, dining with someone was one of the main ways that a relationship is established and furthermore deepened, okay? So there's this huge show that they put on for her as their guest, tons of food and flowers and candles, and then afterwards she's totally transformed. You know, she's no longer depressed and sad and mourning, okay? she's now happy and relaxed and curious about the castle. Okay, so this is showing you how the process works. Once we get over the shock of things and we kind of pull back and we just spend some time, you know, focusing on, you know, what we did wrong, and, you know, where are our faults, and, you know, what can we learn about our experiences, you know. We just kind of pull within, and once we get over, you know, those hard feelings in the beginning, then we can start to, and we sit with them long enough, we dine with them, right? We welcome the process. At that point, we are curious. Okay, so this is just sparked once again that desire to know more. So what's interesting is she starts to wander off from the dining hall, and, you know, she's been told that the west wing is off limits. So she starts wanting to find out about it, and they're like, no, you can go anywhere, but not there, you know. So the symbolism of West is really interesting. I found online one explanation is that it's symbolic of moving from ignorance to wisdom. Very relevant in this case, right? And the helpers at this moment, as she's beginning to explore the castle, they mention to her that there's a library there. She's really excited about it, okay? And so I can't remember what happens with them. They you know, leave her to herself, and she starts to explore, and so she's interested to find the library, but instead of finding the library, because I don't think she was ready for it at this point, she finds the West Wing, right? Also, symbolism of West can mean the place where the sun sets, right? Which is darkness. The dark night of the soul, you might say, right? Because transformation happens at rock bottom. You know, you have to empty your vessel of ego before it can be filled with light. It's just a process. Yes, so I have some links I'm going to share with you guys in the description. So the castle, again, is very dark. Going right along with the symbolism of the West Wing. Belle is exploring. She finds the West Wing, and inside, when she goes into it, everything in there is just like, I think you call it disheveled. It's just a mess, like a tornado went through. But in the middle of it is the glowing rose from the old hag, right? So richly symbolic right here. Because it feels, when you are going through a transformation, like your life is messy, your mind is messy, but there's hope. Hope remains, you know? So that beast finds her. He finds her in there, and he gets really angry at her. So she runs off in fear. And I just think this is just part of the process. The battle is you're uncovering, you know, some deep truths, hard things. It's just the struggle to face them and to accept. Whether it's about people in your life that you thought you knew, that you loved, that you poured into, or whether it's about yourself or just reality, you know, your whole perception of reality can change. Whatever it is, it's just that struggle to face it, right? So she runs off, and it's interesting because she runs out of the castle, but the same wolves that chased her dad chase her. And so what happens is she winds up, she's on horseback, okay, and she winds up falling into this icy pond, just real brief, okay? So she's kind of like dipped, literally like just a fluid type motion. She's just dipped in this icy pond. And you know, she's trying to fight off the wolves. So, you know, you can view this as sort of a baptism, you know, as part of that process. But essentially, Beast comes out there and he rescues her. Okay? So she starts to see the value of herself despite her faults, right? The value of the journey, you might say. It's really more than just herself. It's just because she's in the process of transformation. In other words, she's starting to see her faults differently. and in a better light. She's starting to embrace them, because again, you can't be transformed until you embrace your faults. So Beast swoops in, rescues her, so she starts to see the value there, right? Yeah, so she's not dealing with you know, repulsion and disgust or anything like that, right? So she's back at the castle with Beast, and she's tending to his wounds, very symbolic. And at this point, you know, in the past, when he would argue with her, he would be brash with her, she would just kind of like curl back and just she would just respond in fear. But she's not doing that anymore. So he barks at her, you know, so to speak. She barks back. So this is where she's not running anymore. She's not, we get to a point where we're, you know, we're not running anymore from our faults. We're embracing them. It's like, you know, it is what it is. I'm imperfect and I have faults, and I try my best, but I have faults. And the world is going to totally shame you and blame you for your faults, even when they truly are from an unconscious place and therefore innocent and not with bad intention. They're still going to shame you, and that can put you in a real bad place, you know. And that's the motivation right there for people to just pretend like they don't have any faults, which is really just representative of Gaston. There's motivation in our world to be that way. You know, you're going to face hardships when you don't put on this mask or face of perfection. So there's going to be persecution from the world, right? But you don't have the self-persecution, and that's what matters. That's what matters. Time for coffee. Coffee break. So, you know, at this point, they're back in the castle. He's just rescued her. She's tending his wounds, and she's now not cowering back when he argues with her, right? And she even thanks him for saving her life. Saving her life. Very important, very symbolic here. You might say your spiritual life, right? So, you know, our power is fake, false, and gross when it's superficial. Like Gaston, right? His logic, Gaston's logic was, you know, he literally says this earlier in the movie. He says, you know, I look good and Belle's the most beautiful girl in town, so, you know, we belong together. It's like, it's such a shallow, superficial, immature reasoning, you know. Beast is, can be seen, one lens is the power within, right? But only after it's been through hard lessons, right? And also after it's been redeemed through love, okay? So Beast can be seen as the personification of transformation, and Belle is the vessel, okay? Yes. So after Belle tends to Beast's wounds, he takes her to the library. So she doesn't have to wander off and try to stumble around in the darkness to find it, because she wasn't ready for it. She had the desire, but she wasn't ready. There had to be this reconciliation, you know, this internal reconciliation of getting real with oneself about your limitations and your faults. And so then she was presented with the library, and it's beautiful, it's huge, you know, and all this. So at this point, there's a romance developing between Beast and Belle, okay? But Beast needs to learn how to be a gentleman, how to have manners. It's the same thing as Elsa learning how to use her powers in the Frozen movies, right? So there's a song at this point where it's talking about Beast being coarse and unrefined, right? But Belle is clearly falling for him. So again, there's a romance developing here. So he asks her if she's happy, and she says yes, but she misses her dad. She misses those days, right? So she's able to see him in that magic mirror that the hag had given Beast, and she sees that her dad is sick and maybe dying, okay, which is part of that transformation process, part of that ego death, right, which is really the death of your innocence. You know, it's a slow process sometimes, But, so Beast, you know, he loves her and he releases her. And she says, you mean I'm free? Very important as well right there. Okay, double meaning. So he lets her go. And of course, all the staff members are like, why did you do that? She was going to be the one to break the curse. And he says, because I love her. So there's this old saying that, that I saw on a poster years ago when I was a kid. And it says, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it is yours. And if it doesn't, it never was. So I thought that was really interesting. But he lets her go because he loves her. So, but for the spell to be broken, she has to love him in return, okay? So in the next scene, she's tending to her father. So she was tending to Beast to start with, okay? Now she's back tending to her father, okay? And she tells her dad that the Beast has changed. And then of course all the townspeople are knocking at the door, you know, her dad's door, and they're threatening to take her dad to the loony bin, you know, and lock him up because they think he's crazy, you know, because he told everybody about the Beast. Of course, here's Gaston swooping in again. He proposes to solve everything by proposing to Belle, which I view all this as the temptation to go back to sleep. Again, once you are made aware of things, you have a choice. This is the age of accountability. You know, the choice to pretend like you don't know what you know and continue living via ego for yourself versus crucifying your ego, or, you know, accepting the ego death and being transformed. Now there's this different level of accountability that's on our hearts, right? That's why it's called the hero's journey. It's not easy. A lot of people take the easy route, right? The Bible talks about the wide gate versus the narrow gate. So so there's this proposal, there's this test, this temptation for Belle again, and but she rejects him. She says, you know, no, you're a monster. And so everybody's appalled again, like, why would you say that about him? so I want to share with you Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36. If I can find it here. Yeah, I didn't have it ready. I forgot about this. Hope you guys are enjoying the presentation. I know it's kind of long, but I still hope you like it. Okay, chapter 10, verses 34 through 36, Matthew here. It says, think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. Here again is the division, right? Once you're awake and you're aware, there's a choice, right? There's a split. You can now see what's right and wrong really clear. But it didn't come by grabbing the fruit from the tree. It didn't come by the temptation of the serpent. It didn't come that way. It came honest. It came through conviction of the Holy Spirit. It came through doing the work and acknowledging your faults. So again, you can operate from your own judgment, the little s self, right, which is the false and fake way, from the lie of the serpent, or you can operate from the judgment given from the divine, that numinous divine guiding light inside of you, okay? And it's going to convict our hearts. It's going to show you what's wrong inside your own self that you need to work on, right? And it doesn't feel good. So when she started, you know, out in the castle, it wasn't a very peaceful feeling. It was, you know, Beast was harsh with her, right? So there was no peace to start with. But as she worked through it, then peace blossomed, right? It's part of the process. It's the reward. So, yes. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. So, it's true. Once you wake up, sometimes we can see the people that we thought were closest to us were really never for us, right? They were just exploiting our naivety, unfortunately. So she rejects Gaston, okay? She rejects egoic judgment, right? She has turned from the serpent's temptation to be like God, right? Trusting in self, the little s, self. She has embraced her flaws, and they are repulsive, right, to the world, even though she's embraced them. So remember, in the beginning, Beast was like Gaston, right? Because he was selfish, right? Unkind. He also rejected the hag, right? Which, you know, you might think of her as Truth. Truth knocking at the door of the prince, because Beast was a prince. So here's Truth knocking at the door, and he's like, go away. Okay? So, but Belle, this is interesting, an interesting thing to think about. Belle, you know, has always been able to see the ego in others from the beginning, right? But it took a trying experience for her to come face to face with her own ego and tame it. This is what happens a lot of times when we're immature in life. Our psyches are immature. We're largely unconscious. We can see fault in others, easy, but we can't see the fault in ourselves. And so I think that's very much representative of all these characters in the story. So basically, there's a battle at the castle. They go after Beast. Belle holds up the mirror, trying to prove to everybody that Beast is not bad, you know, and all they can see, they can't see him the same way she sees him. Okay, so once you're awakened in this manner, people will never be able to see things the same way as you. Some people, the people that can, are your people. That's your people, you know. So, but essentially they just take this as a reason to go attack Beast. So and people will attack you, people will try you and test you. So there's this great battle at the castle, and it's really cool because it reminds me of the David and Goliath story, because there's these little household items teapots and cups and, you know, dusters and, you know, candlesticks and all this stuff, right? And they actually outsmart the villains. They do. Why? Because remember, they were eternal optimists. They were holding on to faith the whole time, just like David when he defeated Goliath. Okay, through the whole curse, they kept their faith. So the final battle, you know, is between Gaston and the Beast. And, you know, Gaston's just really beating up on Beast, and he says, you know, get up. What's wrong? Are you too kind and gentle to fight back? You're going to be mocked. You're going to be mocked when you turn the other cheek. You're going to be tested. Okay? So he reluctantly fights back. Okay? But it's really more like self-defense. Okay? But ultimately, he is mortally wounded by Gaston. And this is very significant. Okay, this is the pinnacle of the transformation right here. This is the final blow to the ego. This is the, you know, it's done at this point. This is the end of the ego death. Okay, and so there's no more resistance. It's just complete acceptance of flaws and limitations. Okay, so at this point, you know, Gaston is defeated, and Beast, in other words, there will never be consideration at this point for the hero. The hero has made the choice, the decision to never go back to sleep. The hero has made the decision to never embrace ego, right? The hero never wanted to, but was still put through a lot of tests and trials. But by staying committed and steadfast to the mission, right, then resistance of one's own imperfections and limitations is fully embraced. So here we have Beast, you know, laying on the floor on the balcony, and Belle is laying over him, mourning and crying, right? But when she says, I love you, that's when the transformation happens and the spell is broken. So we see Beast rising up, his corpse is rising up, and there's light. You can see it's beautiful the way it's illustrated in the movie, but there's this light that forms within him, and it just starts to course throughout his body and fill his body until it shoots out of his fingertips and his toes, and then he's suddenly transformed again into this beautiful, handsome, you might say, prince, right? And of course, they are in love and they live happily ever after, like any good fairy tale. So I think that this is just a beautiful example of the hero's journey, of our journey. It's really our journey in life when you are someone who just wants to keep searching and learning and growing, and isn't afraid, doesn't run from the hard stuff, and even self-examination, right? Especially self-examination. So I hope that this presentation has been very educational, informative, entertaining. I hope that you really enjoyed it. I thank you so much for coming along to hear the message today. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.